Oh, Karen thought she'd owned the lake, plotting to steal an ex-soldier's private shore. His response, a legally unshakable fence that sparks a neighborhood war and a stunning showdown. Witness the takedown, you won't believe the fallout. Don't miss what happens next. The letter arrived not in an envelope, but hand-delivered. A crisp ivory sheet slipped with audacious presumption under the screen door of Jack Monroe's half-finished cabin. It wasn't a welcome note. It was a thinly veiled decree. Dear Mr. Monroe, it began, the cursive elegant yet imperious. It has come to the attention of the Stillwater Lake Homeowners Association that certain understandings regarding lake access may not have been fully conveyed during your recent acquisition. We trust you will be amenable to maintaining the long-standing community traditions. The signature, a flourish of ink, read Karen Miller, President, Stillwater Lake HOA. Jack, a man whose 48 years had carved a landscape of stoic resolve onto his features, a testament to 2 decades navigating the brutal terrains of Marine Corps service, read it twice. His jaw tightened. He'd sunk every last cent, in a good portion of his soul, into this 2-acre slice of lakeside woodland. This wasn't just land. It was his attempt at clawing back a piece of the peace that war had stolen. The understandings Karen referred to were glaringly absent from his deed, his survey, his title insurance. What was present was a clear, legally defined boundary that granted him an unusually generous and private stretch of the Stillwater shoreline. He'd been here barely a month, the scent of sawdust and fresh paint still clinging to the raw pine of his cabin. The silence he craved, the kind that hummed with life, not the sterile void of barracks, was already under siege. Karen Miller, a name he'd only vaguely registered from closing documents, was making her opening gambit. Later that day, she appeared in person, a vision in expensive athleisure wear that seemed out of place against the rugged backdrop of Jack's ongoing construction. With her was her son, Dylan, a youth whose smirk seemed permanently affixed, and a younger girl, presumably her daughter, Chloe, who eyed Jack's military-grade duffel bag near the door with open curiosity. Karen carried no welcome basket, only an air of unshakable authority. "Mr. Monroe," she announced, her voice as smooth and hard as polished riverstone. "Karen Miller, we need to discuss the lakefront." There was no preamble, no feigned neighborly warmth. This was a territorial claim. Jack stepped onto his porch, his boots thudding softly on the new planks. He was not a large man, but he possessed a stillness that often made others uneasy. "My survey documents are quite clear, Mrs. Miller. The lakefront accompanying this parcel is private property." Karen's smile was a brief, brittle thing. "Ah, yes, the technicalities in a community like Stillwater. Mr. Monroe, we often find that neighborly cooperation and long-standing tradition hold more practical weight than lines on a map drawn by some surveyor who doesn't live here, doesn't understand our ways." Her gaze flicked dismissively towards the water. "That little cove, for instance. For generations, it's been the children's swimming area, the spot for our annual Labor Day barbecue. My brother, Michael, practically lives there with his fishing rod. Generations who were, perhaps, using Mrs. Albright's land without her explicit ongoing consent," Jack countered, his voice quiet but edged with steel. The previous owner, elderly and reclusive, had clearly been steamrollered. He wouldn't be. Dylan snickered. Karen shot him a silencing glance before turning back to Jack, her composure momentarily ruffled. "Mrs. Albright understood the spirit of community. She was accommodating." The implication hung heavy. "You will be too." "I understand the importance of clear boundaries, Mrs. Miller," Jack stated, "and the importance of respecting them. This isn't some military outpost, Mr. Monroe, where you can just draw lines in the sand," Karen retorted, her voice rising slightly. "This is a neighborhood, my neighborhood. My family has been here for 50 years. We value access. We value tradition. And I value what I paid for," Jack said, his gaze unwavering. which includes the exclusive right to that cove and the land leading to it. The air crackled. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a fundamental clash of wills, of perceived entitlement versus legal right. Karen's eyes narrowed. She was a woman accustomed to getting her way. To her pronouncements being treated as law, Jack's calm, unyielding opposition was a foreign and clearly unwelcome experience. "You'll find, Mr. Monroe," she said, her voice dropping to a near hiss, "that being uncooperative at Stillwater Lake can have consequences. We are a tight-knit community. We look out for our own." The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. She turned on her heel, a curt Dylan Chloe summoning her children, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of apprehension and, in Dylan's case, a dawning excitement at the prospect of conflict. As they retreated, Jack watched them go, a cold knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't the quiet refuge he'd envisioned. It was a new kind of battlefield, one where the weapons were bylaws, social pressure, and a relentless sense of entitlement. He had hoped to leave conflict behind, but it seemed conflict had a way of finding him. The initial skirmishes were petty, designed to needle and test his resolve. Loud music from boats that drifted too close to his shoreline late in the evening. Trash. A beer can here. A plastic wrapper there, appearing just inside his property markers. Dylan and his friends accidentally kicking their soccer ball repeatedly into his newly planted vegetable garden, then trampling the seedlings as they retrieved it, offering smirking, insincere apologies. Jack documented everything with the meticulous precision of a seasoned intelligence officer. Dates, times, photographs, he said nothing. Did nothing overt. His silence seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst would have. He knew Karen was orchestrating this campaign of harassment, trying to wear him down, to make him concede out of sheer frustration. Then came the incident with the community dock improvement. One morning, Jack awoke to the sound of hammering. He walked down to his cove to find Karen's brother, Michael, a beefy man whose resentment radiated off him in waves, overseeing two workmen who were sinking posts for a small dock, squarely on Jack's land. "Morning," Michael grunted, not meeting Jack's eye. Karen figured it was time to spruce up the community access point. Better for everyone. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just trespassing. They were attempting to build a permanent structure. Jack's voice, when he spoke, was deceptively mild. "Michael, this is my property. You know that. Karen knows that." Michael finally looked at him, a belligerent glint in his eyes. "It's for the community. Monroe, don't be a hard case. Karen's the HOA president. She said it's fine. Her authority as HOA president does not extend to appropriating private land," Jack said, stepping closer. "I want you and your men off my property now, and take your materials with you." One of the workmen, a younger man, looked uneasy, glancing between Jack and Michael. "Or what, Monroe?" Michael sneered, taking a step forward himself, trying to use his bulk to intimidate. "You gonna call the Marines?" Jack didn't flinch. "No, Michael. I'm going to call the sheriff, and then my lawyer. Trespassing, destruction of property. It adds up." He pulled out his phone. "You have 60 seconds to start moving." The mention of the sheriff and a lawyer seemed to penetrate Michael's bluster. He exchanged a frustrated look with the workman. He knew Jack wasn't bluffing. There was a certainty about the ex-Marine that was unnerving. All right, Michael grumbled, backing down, his face flushed. "But Karen's not gonna like this. You're making a big mistake. Monroe, a big mistake." "The only mistake being made here, Michael," Jack said, his eyes like chips of ice, "is yours in assuming I'd roll over." He watched them pack up, his stance relaxed but ready. Karen arrived minutes later, car tires spitting gravel as she skidded to a halt. Her face was a mask of fury. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? Monroe," she shrieked, advancing on him. "This is community improvement. This is about shared access, about the children, about property values. This is about you attempting to steal my land. Karen, Jack cut her off, his voice carrying easily over her tirade. It stops now. This is my property. Respect it, or face the legal consequences. It's that simple. He held her furious gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his cabin. The quiet defiance of his retreating back more infuriating to Karen than any shouted argument could have been. The battle lines were no longer just drawn, they were deeply entrenched. Jack knew Karen Miller would not let this rest. She would escalate. Her pride was as vast as her perceived authority. And Jack, with the grim determination of a man defending his last sanctuary, began to meticulously plan his counter-offensive. The fight for Stillwater Cove was far from over. It was just beginning to reveal its true, ugly dimensions. The silence that followed the dock incident was deceptive. Like the eerie calm before a summer squall, Karen Miller did not apologize, nor did she retreat. Instead, the assaults on Jack's peace became more insidious, a campaign of psychological warfare waged with the subtlety of a viper in the grass. His morning paper, usually tossed onto his porch, began appearing at the muddy edge of the road, sometimes torn, anonymous complaints, meticulously typed inciting obscure HOA bylaws, started arriving in his mailbox. His grass was allegedly a quarter-inch too long. The color of his new rain barrel was out of harmony with the community aesthetic. His truck, parked neatly on his own gravel driveway, was deemed a commercial-grade vehicle, unsuitable for residential display. Each complaint was signed by a concerned Stillwater Lake resident, but Karen's fingerprints were all over them, metaphorically speaking. Jack filed them away with his other documentation, his face an impassive mask. He knew this was her game to bury him in petty grievances, to paint him as the problematic newcomer, the troublemaker who refused to assimilate. The other residents of Stillwater Lake, for the most part, kept their distance. He'd see them at the small community mail stop or the local grocery store. Some offered hesitant, sympathetic smiles when they thought Karen's network of informants wasn't watching. Others openly sided with their HOA president, their greetings to Jack cool, their conversations ceasing abruptly when he approached. He was a pariah in the making, and Karen was the chief architect of his ostracization. The peace he had envisioned, the quiet mornings by the lake, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands, was now tainted by a constant, low-level vigilance. He found himself scanning the tree line more often, noting unfamiliar cars passing too slowly. It was a familiar feeling, this heightened awareness, but one he had desperately hoped to leave behind in the arid landscapes of his past. Yet, Karen's relentless pressure had an unintended effect. It solidified Jack's resolve, transforming his desire for quiet enjoyment of his property into an ironclad determination to defend his rights. He wasn't just fighting for a piece of land anymore. He was fighting against the tyranny of petty despots everywhere, the kind who use their slivers of power to bully and intimidate. He began his own quiet offensive. His first step was to consult a lawyer specializing in property and riparian rights, a sharp-witted woman named Eleanor Vance, whose office was 2 towns over, far from Karen's sphere of influence. He laid out the situation, presenting his survey, his deed, and the growing file of Karen's harassments. Eleanor listened intently, her expression growing more serious as Jack detailed the HOA president's encroachments. "She's a classic bully, Mr. Monroe," Eleanor stated when he'd finished. "And like most bullies, her power relies on her victims not knowing their rights or being unwilling to assert them. Your deed is ironclad, and your surveyed lake frontage is unambiguous." "She mentioned community tradition giving her rights," Jack said. Eleanor snorted. "Community tradition doesn't supersede a legally recorded deed, especially when that tradition amounts to trespassing. As for the HOA, their bylaws cannot legally compel you to surrender your private property rights for uncompensated common use, particularly if your property was clearly defined before any such HOA understanding was concocted." "I was thinking of putting up a fence," Jack said, watching her reaction carefully, "along my precise property lines, All of them. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly, including into the water to mark the full extent of your riparian ownership. If it's legal, Jack confirmed. I want a clear, undeniable demarcation, something even Mrs. Miller can't pretend to misunderstand. The lawyer leaned back, a thoughtful expression on her face. In this state, and given the specifics of your deed which likely grants you rights to the low water mark, a fence is certainly a robust statement of ownership. It can extend into the water, provided it doesn't obstruct general navigation, which, given the cove's configuration as described on your survey, it needs to be permitted, of course. Local zoning, possibly Army Corps of Engineers if it impacts navigable waters significantly, though for a simple property line fence into a cove like yours, local permits are usually the main hurdle. She paused. It will be provocative. Provocation is not my primary intent, Miss Vance, Jack replied. Clarity is, and the cessation of harassment and trespass. Then let's get you the permits, Eleanor said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. I have a feeling this will be a rather interesting case to follow, while Eleanor navigated the bureaucratic labyrinth of permits. Jack began his own preparations. He researched fencing materials, something durable, aesthetically acceptable, yet undeniably firm. He cleared a narrow, precise path along his land boundaries, meticulously following the surveyor's markers. This activity did not go unnoticed. Dylan Miller, now Karen's de facto scout, was often seen lingering on the periphery of Jack's property, ostensibly walking his dog or riding his ATV on the community trails that bordered Jack's land. He'd report back to his mother, and soon fresh whispers circulated. Monroe's clearing trees, he's going to build some monstrosity. Or, he's trying to wall himself off, like he's better than us. The tension in the neighborhood ratcheted up. One evening, as Jack was returning from a supply run, he found a crudely painted sign hammered into the ground just outside his driveway. Go home! Army boy, we do not want your kind here. Jack pulled the sign out of the ground, his expression unreadable. He didn't report it. He simply added it to his evidence file. This was an escalation, a direct personal attack. Karen was getting desperate, or perhaps more accurately, her proxies were. The twist came during a scheduled HOA community meeting, one Jack had initially decided to ignore, but Eleanor had advised him to attend. Let them see you're not intimidated, and it's good to know what they're plotting. The meeting was held in the small, clapboard community hall. Karen presided, radiating smug authority. The agenda was packed with mundane items, but near the end, she introduced a new business item, a proposal for the formal designation of the Stillwater Cove South Beach as a protected community recreational area. A map was displayed. Stillwater Cove South Beach was, of course, Jack's private cove. As many of you know, Karen began, her voice dripping with false concern, this cherished area has been used by our families for generations. Recently, its accessibility has come under question. This proposal would formalize its status, ensuring it remains available for all residents to enjoy. In perpetuity, it would involve a minor redrawing of common area boundaries for the greater good of our community. A murmur went through the room. Some faces showed confusion, others dawning comprehension. This was a direct attempt to legislate away his property rights under the guise of community benefit. Before Jack could speak, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, who lived on the opposite side of the lake and was known for her prize-winning roses and no-nonsense attitude, stood up. Karen, she said, her voice surprisingly firm, are you talking about Mr. Monroe's land, the piece that Mrs. Albright owned? Karen's smile faltered. Well, yes, a portion of it, but it's for the good of everyone, Martha, to preserve our traditions. My tradition, Karen, Mrs. Henderson continued, is respecting what belongs to others. Did Mr. Monroe agree to this redrawing? All eyes turned to Jack. He stood slowly. No, Mrs. Henderson, I did not, and I was not consulted. My property line is clearly defined and legally recorded. This proposal is an attempt to expropriate private land without consent or compensation. Karen's face flushed. Mr. Monroe, this is about community spirit, not legalistic nitpicking. It's about property rights. Mrs. Miller. Jack stated calmly, which I expect this HOA to respect, not actively try to undermine. The meeting devolved quickly. Several residents, emboldened by Mrs. Henderson and Jack's firm stance, began questioning the proposal's legality and fairness. Others, loyal to Karen, voiced their support, speaking of selfishness and newcomers not understanding our ways. Dylan Miller, sitting beside his mother, scowled openly at Jack. Karen, seeing she was losing control of the narrative, banged her gavel. This is merely a proposal for discussion. We will table it for further review by the HOA board, she declared. Her voice sharp with anger. Jack left the meeting feeling a grim satisfaction. Karen had overplayed her hand. She had inadvertently revealed the extent of her intentions to the entire community. And not everyone was blindly following her lead. But he also knew this defeat would only make her more determined, more dangerous. The permits for his fence came through a week later. Eleanor called him with the news. All clear. Mr. Monroe, zoning approved. No significant environmental impact objections. You can proceed. I'd advise having a copy of the permits and your survey plat readily available on site during construction. Jack thanked her. He had already contacted a reputable fencing contractor, one known for quality work and discretion. Based 2 counties away, the materials, heavy gauge coated chain link, chosen for its durability and transparency, not for aesthetics, but for its unambiguous statement of boundary, were ordered. He opted against a solid wood fence to avoid claims he was creating an eyesore or unduly blocking views through his property from the road. Only views of his private shoreline from the lake and adjacent lands. The fence was not about total privacy, it was about territorial integrity. As he finalized the arrangements, he noticed an increase in Dylan's surveillance. The teenager was now making almost daily passes on his ATV, sometimes stopping at the edge of the woods, clearly trying to see what Jack was up to. Jack ignored him. The less Karen knew about the specifics, the better. Let her speculate. Let her worry. The quiet Navy veteran was preparing his own kind of shock and awe, one that would be perfectly legal, utterly undeniable, and designed to bring Karen Miller's reign of petty tyranny to a crashing halt. The battle for Stillwater Cove was about to enter its most decisive phase. The fencing crew arrived just after dawn on a misty Tuesday morning. The rumble of their trucks, a low growl that cut through the usual lakeside quiet. Jack was waiting for them, a thermos of coffee in hand, the permits and survey documents safely stored in a weatherproof satchel. He'd chosen this day deliberately. Karen typically attended a regional HOA president's meeting on Tuesdays. A good 2 hours away, Michael, her brother, worked a regular 9-to-5 job in town. With luck, a significant portion of the fence would be up before either of them realized what was happening. The crew, led by a no-nonsense foreman named Gus, was efficient and professional. They'd been briefed by Jack and Eleanor Vance, understood the potential for neighborhood friction, and were prepared to work quickly and precisely. They started at the road frontage, sinking posts along the exact line indicated by the surveyor's bright orange stakes, then moved methodically down one side of Jack's property. The clang of the post driver a rhythmic, almost martial beat. Jack didn't hover, but he remained visible, working on his own project, assembling raised garden beds, a calm presence that underscored his authority over the operation. He saw Dylan Miller ride by on his ATV around mid-morning. Slow down, then speed off, dust billowing behind him. Jack knew the clock was now ticking faster. It was just after lunch. With the side boundary nearly complete and the crew beginning to work along the sensitive lakefront portion, when the first car screeched to a halt, it wasn't Karen, it was her brother, Michael. His face fused with fury as he scrambled out of his pickup. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" "Monroe," Michael bellowed, storming towards the work crew. Gus, a burly man with forearms like oak branches, stepped forward to intercept him. "We're erecting a fence, sir, on Mr. Monroe's property, with all due permits." Gus's voice was calm but firm. "Permits. This is an outrage. Karen will shut this down. This is community land," Michael spluttered. Trying to push past Gus, Jack walked over, placing himself between Michael and the ongoing work. "Michael," he said, his voice even, "this is my property. I have every legal right to fence it. Here are the permits, and here is the survey." He proffered the satchel. Michael swatted it away. "I don't need to see your damn papers. This is harassment. You're trying to destroy this community. I'm trying to protect my property from trespassers like you." "Michael," Jack replied, his tone hardening, "now I suggest you step back and let these men do their work. If you interfere, I will have you removed for trespassing and obstruction." A small crowd of neighbors was beginning to gather at a distance, drawn by the commotion. Whispers rippled through them. Some looked shocked, others uncertain. A few, Jack noted, seemed to be trying to hide smirks. The sight of the fence post marching inexorably towards and then into the water was clearly a stunning development. The section of fence that would extend into the lake, demarcating his riparian rights, was the crew's current focus. They were driving specialized posts designed for submerged placement, just as Michael was winding up for another tirade. Karen's sedan roared up the road, tires skidding on the gravel shoulder. She burst out of the car, her face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. Her usually immaculate attire was slightly askew, as if she'd driven in a frenzy. Dylan must have reached her. "Monroe!" Her shriek cut through the air. "Stop this! Stop this at once!" She marched towards Jack, her eyes blazing. "You can't do this. That lakefront is for everyone. I am the HOA president. I forbid this, Karen," Jack said, his voice carrying clearly over her outburst. "Your authority as HOA president does not give you the power to forbid me from legally fencing my own property. These men are licensed contractors, operating under valid permits issued by the county. Here they are." He held out the documents again. This time, Karen snatched them, her hands trembling as she scanned the official letterheads and stamps. Her face paled slightly as the reality of the situation began to penetrate her fury. The permits were undeniably authentic. The survey map was clear. This is a trick," she stammered, looking around wildly as if seeking support. "There must be a mistake. This can't be legal." "It's quite legal, Mrs. Miller," Jack said. "Ms. Vance, my attorney, ensured all procedures were meticulously followed. This fence marks my property line. Nothing more, nothing less." Her son, Dylan, now stood beside her, his earlier bravado replaced by a look of stunned confusion. He'd clearly never imagined Jack would, or could, take such decisive, legally fortified action. He'd seen Jack as an isolated target, easy prey for his mother's machinations. The sight of the fence, a tangible, unyielding barrier, was a brutal refutation of that belief. "But the children, the community access, our traditions," Karen pleaded, her voice cracking slightly, the imperious tone giving way to a desperate edge. This wasn't going according to her script. She was used to wielding power, not having it legally circumvented. "Your traditions of using my land without permission are over, Karen," Jack stated, no triumph in his voice, only quiet finality. "As for the children, there's plenty of other community lakefront, and the public access point at the north end of the lake. They'll manage." The true shift in power became palpable as the crew continued their work. Unperturbed by the drama unfolding, the rhythmic clang of the post driver, the whir of power tools, the quiet instructions of the foreman, these were the sounds of an unstoppable, lawful process. Karen's authority, built on bluster and assumed consent, was crumbling against the hard reality of legally defined boundaries and a man unshakably resolved to enforce them. One of Karen's staunchest allies, a woman named Carol who lived 2 doors down, stepped forward. Karen, maybe he has a point. If the permits are real, Karen whirled on her. Whose side are you on, Carol? Carol visibly shrank back. But the seed of doubt had been planted among Karen's supporters. They were witnessing not an act of aggression from Jack, but a clear assertion of right, backed by the law. The narrative Karen had so carefully constructed of Jack as the unreasonable, selfish outsider was visibly fracturing. Hidden truths began to surface in the murmurs of the crowd. I always wondered if Mrs. Albright really wanted everyone trampling through her cove. Someone whispered. Another added, my cousin tried to buy that parcel years ago, but Karen told everyone it was basically HOA land and scared him off. The carefully maintained facade of Stillwater Lake's benevolent matriarch was cracking. Desperate, Karen turned to the workman. I order you to stop as the president of this homeowners association. Gus, the foreman, barely glanced at her. Ma'am, my contract is with Mr. Monroe. My permits are from the county, unless you have a court order signed by a judge. We will continue our work. He gestured towards the fence. We expect to be finished by late afternoon. A court order. The words hung in the air. Karen knew, with a sinking feeling, that obtaining one on such short notice, against valid permits, was impossible. She had no legal standing. She looked at Jack, her eyes filled with a potent mixture of hatred and dawning helplessness. You will regret this, Monroe. You've made an enemy of this entire community. No, Karen, Jack corrected, his voice still calm. I've made an enemy of you, and perhaps a few who benefited from your misuse of authority. I suspect most of this community simply wants to live peaceably and respect their neighbors' rights. That's all I'm asking for. He turned away from her then, a clear dismissal, and walked back towards his cabin, leaving her standing there, poised, impotent, as the fence continued its inexorable march across his land and into the waters of Stillwater Lake. The sight of the poem, evenly spaced, glinting in the afternoon sun, extending a clear line of demarcation into the cove she had considered her family's private playground, was a visceral symbol of her defeat. Her son, Dylan, tugged at her arm. Mom, maybe we should just go. His face was pale. The absolute certainty he'd seen in Jack, the undeniable legality of the fence, had clearly shaken him. He was witnessing his mother, the unassailable queen of Stillwater Lake, being systematically and legally outmaneuvered. Karen didn't respond. She just stared at the fence, at the workmen, at the silent, watching neighbors. The power she had wielded so casually, so arrogantly, was being dismantled before her very eyes. One fence post at a time. The revelation wasn't just that Jack Monroe had rights, it was that her own perceived authority had been a house of cards, built on unchallenged assumptions and the quiet acquiescence of others, and Jack Monroe had just called her bluff. By late afternoon, the fence was complete. It stood as a stark, undeniable declaration this land and this portion of the lake belonged to Jack Monroe. The final section, a neatly installed gate near his cabin allowing him access to his own shoreline, clicked shut with a satisfying finality. The work crew packed up their tools, accepted Jack's payment in quiet thanks, and drove away, leaving behind a dramatically altered Stillwater Lake landscape, both physically and socially. Karen Miller did not take her defeat gracefully. For several days, she was conspicuously absent, reportedly indisposed. Whispers, however, were anything but. The story of the fence had spread like wildfire, not just through Stillwater Lake, but to neighboring communities and even the local town council, which had issued the permits. The main topic of conversation was no longer Jack's supposed unneighborliness, but Karen's blatant overreach and subsequent, very public, humbling. Her son, Dylan, seemed to have undergone a significant change. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a subdued, almost wary expression. He was seen having hushed, intense conversations with his mother on their porch, his gestures conveying a sense of bewildered frustration. The solid, unyielding reality of the fence and the undeniable legality behind it had clearly forced a crack in his perception of his mother's omnipotence. For the first time, he was seeing the consequences of her actions, not just the benefits he had enjoyed. The first official repercussion for Karen came not from Jack, but from within the HOA itself. Mitten Henderson, the elderly woman who had first questioned Karen's proposal at the community meeting, along with several other long-term residents who valued fairness and legality over cronyism, circulated a petition. It called for an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the conduct and leadership of the current HOA president and the unauthorized attempt to appropriate private property. The petition gathered signatures with surprising speed. Many residents, previously cowed by Karen's assertive personality or unwilling to cause waves, now felt emboldened by Jack's stand and the clear evidence of Karen's abuse of power. Simultaneously, Eleanor Vance, Jack's lawyer, sent a formal letter to the Stillwater Lake HOA board. It was a masterpiece of polite but firm legal admonishment. It detailed the history of harassment Jack had endured, the attempts to unlawfully seize his property, and the clear violation of HOA bylaws regarding respect for private property rights. It strongly advised the board to take corrective action to prevent any future infringements and to ensure all HOA activities remain strictly within legal and ethical boundaries. It also subtly hinted at potential legal action for damages if the harassment continued or if there were any attempts to undermine Jack's property rights further. The letter was copied to the town council for their information. The emergency HOA meeting was a subdued affair compared to Karen's previous carefully orchestrated performances. She sat at the head table, no longer radiating smug authority, but a brittle, defensive anger. When the petition was formally presented, and resident after resident stood up to voice their concerns, not just about the incident with Jack, but about past instances of her favoritism and high-handedness, Karen's composure began to crumble. Her attempts to justify her actions, to paint herself as a victim of an ungrateful newcomer, fell flat. The community had seen the truth. Starkly demarcated by a chain-link fence, the vote of no confidence was overwhelming. Karen Miller was stripped of her presidency. Her brother, Michael, who had also benefited from her reign and had been a vocal supporter of her tactics, found himself increasingly isolated. His casual use of other people's lakefront was over. In the weeks that followed, Stillwater Lake began to find a new equilibrium. The interim HOA leadership, spearheaded by Mrs. Henderson, made it a priority to review and clarify bylaws, ensuring they were fair and legally sound. There was a palpable sense of relief among many residents, a feeling that a shadow had been lifted. Jack Monroe finally began to experience the peace he had sought. The fence, initially a symbol of conflict, slowly became just a part of the landscape. He installed his dock, planted his garden, and spent his mornings watching the sunrise over his cove, undisturbed. Neighbors, some of whom had previously shunned him, began to offer tentative smiles, then friendly greetings. A few even stopped by to apologize for their previous silence or to express admiration for his quiet fortitude. He accepted their overtures with a calm grace, holding no grudges. He hadn't sought to be a community hero, only to be left alone on his own land. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Jack was repairing a loose board on his deck, he saw Dylan Miller walking along the road near his property. The young man hesitated, then, to Jack's surprise, walked up his driveway. "Mr. Monroe," Dylan said, his voice quiet, almost shy. Jack straightened up. "Dylan, I wanted to apologize," Dylan mumbled, scuffing his shoe on the gravel. "For, the stuff before, the way we acted. It wasn't right." He looked towards the fence, then back at Jack. "My mom, she's taking the HOA thing pretty hard. But I get it now. What you were saying about property lines and stuff." Jack regarded him for a moment. He saw not the arrogant youth of before, but a young man grappling with a difficult lesson. "Apology accepted, Dylan," Jack said. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. Dylan nodded, a flicker of relief in his eyes. Thanks. He paused. That fence, it's actually pretty well built. Jack allowed himself a small smile. I made sure of it. Dylan lingered for another moment, then nodded again and walked away, straighter than he had arrived. It was a small moment, but it signified a larger shift. The illusion of Karena's untouchable power had been shattered, not by anger or aggression, but by the calm, methodical application of law and unwavering resolve. Jack Monroe had bought a piece of land by a lake, hoping for solitude. He found himself in a battle he hadn't sought, against a foe who underestimated his quiet strength. In the end, his victory wasn't just about a fence or a few acres of shoreline. It was a testament to the simple, enduring power of standing your ground, legally and ethically, against those who believe the rules don't apply to them. The waters of Stillwater Lake were calmer now, reflecting a newfound respect for boundaries, both seen and unseen. And Jack, the Kukwinyan, had finally found his peace, not by retreating from the world, but by firmly and justly claiming his small part of it. The authorities, having reviewed the permits in the situation, found no cause for intervention beyond ensuring public order, which had been maintained. The fence stood, a quiet monument to one man's rightful stand,